evening, and thanks everybody for coming out to our barbecue with no meat, okay? But hopefully the sun will go down and the trees will shade us here at the Reeves Museum and Victorian Home. So thanks again for coming out. And I put over on the library table, there's a raffle. You can sign up to get a, win a book. And I also put some footnotes, which is our newsletter to tell what the events are coming up at the library. And I also put out a little flyer at the end of August. Today we're very fortunate to have Linda Castillo as our author. And at the end of August, Rob Schwartz is coming. And he will be speaking at the library. He's the son of Maury Schwartz, who is the subject of the book Tuesdays with Maury. So he found a manuscript that his dad had written in a drawer after his dad passed away. And he said, that book is worthwhile, I'm going to publish it. So he will be here at the end of August. You can check all that out either on our website or whatever. So tonight we are going to start our program with Sheriff Orvis Campbell. And the reason we invited him to speak is this. As you know, Linda Castillo's main protagonist in all of her mysteries is Kate Burkholder. And she's a female sheriff in a rural county. So we thought, we have a sheriff in our county. I consider our county to be rather rural. He's not a girl, of course, but he has a lot of experience in sheriffing. And I thought he could talk to us about what it's like to be a sheriff in a small place. And maybe that will enrich our reading of the books that Linda Castillo writes, and will also enrich our understanding of what this man and all of the people who work under him do in our county. Because without them, we count on their services. So we want to thank him for serving our county, and we want to thank him for coming this evening and talking to us about his life as a sheriff.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm under no illusion that you're here for me. None at all. Because I speak a lot of places and a lot of people don't show up and set up lawn chairs. So the library put out a social media post today reminding of this event. And I had forgot that I'd never told my daughter, who's a big reader, she's a teacher, that I was going to speak here. So I took a quick snapshot of it. She's in Florida, she can't be here. And I sent it to her, and she said, "Oh my God, that's cool." She said, "Why are you speaking?" And I said, "Because I'm interesting." She goes, "No, really, why are you speaking?" And I have that in text, so I have no illusions. They keep me humble. So, first of all, to understand what it's like, Kate Burkholder is actually a police chief, a little bit different than a sheriff, in a small town. But as I do my research, a lot of what she does and how she works and the battles that she has a lot to do with how she was raised in that community, and that affects you tremendously when you lead a law enforcement agency. So if I can't really speak as to what it's like to be a sheriff, but I can speak as to what it's like to be me, and that's going to be based off of how I was raised. So I grew up here. I grew up in Tuscarawas County. I've never lived anywhere else. I graduated from New Philly in 1990. And I was hired, I've only had 3 jobs in my life. At 16, I worked for Doug and Holly Clark Sporting Goods, here in Dover. At 18, 2 weeks out of high school, I was hired by Judge George Demas. If you remember him, he's now passed away. But he was a tremendous judge, big personality. And if you didn't know this, he was the only guy to beat F. Lee Bailey in a trial in a 27-year run. F. Lee Bailey was one of O.J. Simpson's defense lawyers, and he flew in here once, and Judge Demas was the prosecutor then and defeated F. Lee Bailey. So I was kind of an honor working for a guy like that. And then at 21, I was hired by Sheriff Harold McKimmey. And now I'm 51, and this is my 30th year with the Sheriff's Office. So, when you talk about Kate Burkholder and you think about, the fact that she come from an Amish background and community, I have to talk about how I was raised. So I was loved by my family. No abuse, nothing like that. But some of you may have known them, but we were very poor. That's pretty common here in Appalachia. My house was condemned by the health department my senior year. We were forced to move. And it was always tough growing up, but I was always cared for. And a lot of people say that know what I came from. They give me a lot of credit for making it to this position. And I once had someone try to compliment me by telling me that I was a self-made man. And I'm going to tell you that that's not true at all. Doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a self-made man. So I told you that when I was 16, I got hired by the Clars, and I had saved up all the money I could to buy my first car, and it was a little Dodge Daytona. And I saved that money by mowing lawns. I paid cash for it, and I was in starting my second week at Clars, just finished up my first. I was driving to work on a Saturday morning, and my car just stopped going. It was a little 5-speed, and I couldn't get it to go, and I pulled over, and I don't know anything about cars, didn't know anything then, really don't know much more now. And I looked underneath, and the gears of the car were laying on the ground. And I knew that was bad. That was the beginning of my investigative skills. I knew that was bad. So I was right close to Clars. I parked, I went in, I went to work. We had the car towed. And you have to understand that, like, even getting a car towed when you come from those kind of beginnings is extremely stressful. Something I wouldn't think about now. I mean, I'd pay the tow bill and life goes on and it wouldn't affect me at all. Well, back then it was a worry. And I remember calling around trying to get repairs, and I remember Doug Clar helping me. And the cheapest we could come up with, now this is in like 1988, was $1,200 to fix the transmission. It was a rebuilt transmission, and we'd called several places. And I would not be exaggerating when I tell you $1,200 to me then was like $20,000. It was almost unsurmountable. And I remember being worried, and I remember playing it off, and I remember that Doug Clar, without hesitation, and this is exactly how it happened, he reached in his pocket, he pulled out a wad of cash, and he handed me $1,200. He never met me other than like a week and a half before, and he gave me that money. He gave it to me interest-free. I did pay him back. He hung a little yellow poster card up there, and it said, "Oh, owes Doug," and we started at $1,250, I think it was, and every paycheck I give him some back. So to this day, I'm undyingly loyal to Doug Clar. We're still friends. The first time I ran for sheriff, I didn't have an opponent. He was still giving me financial donations and making me t-shirts for parades. And I'm like, Doug, nobody's running against me. He's like, I don't care. You know, so I'm very, very loyal to the Clar family, and they're still close friends. So from there, I guess I back up before there. I have to tell you that, you know, I worked for Judge Demas, or after there I go to Judge Demas, and we didn't take vacations. We never went to the beach or anything like that. It's just something our family didn't do. But my family, Orvis, that's a name from Tennessee. My aunt and uncle had a child. That child died at birth. It was a traumatic situation in which my aunt could no longer have children, so my dad named me after his brother as a tribute to him, so that my uncle could have a boy named after him. So they were very close. So the year I started with juvenile court under Judge Demas, I had told him, I said, hey, we're planning to go to Tennessee. I haven't seen my uncle in a number of years. And of course, I didn't have any vacation, so it was going to be unpaid. And he was going to let me go. Well, the week we were getting ready to go, I lived right across the street from the high school. The week before we were getting ready to go, a semi, and I don't really remember what caused it, but a semi hit our only car that would even come close to making it there and totaled it. And I remember not being upset, not at all. But our vacation was off. We didn't have a vehicle then, and it was their fault, so we knew we would get something. And I remember going back to the judge the next day. We were supposed to leave in like a day. And I said, hey, I'm not going to need that time off. This happened, and we're going to reschedule it later. Well, remember, I grew up in a pretty bad place. We had to move. This place wasn't much better, right? So the last thing I wanted was the judge showing up. But the next night, the judge, George Demas, and his wife showed up at our house with both of their cars. And I can tell you that my first thought was total humiliation. You know, the judge lived in a nice house. You know, he was well known. He wore suits every day, and he had a very nice place up in Wiltshire Hills. And when he showed up at my house, it was a little bit embarrassing. So I tried to play it off and be cool, and he says, hey, we want you to take our other car. We want you to go see your uncle. And I says, oh, no. We're going to get another car, the insurance and everything. You know, I was playing it off, and I'm not joking when I said, he looked at me and he said, you either take the car or you're out of a job. Now, if you knew George Demas, which I didn't know him all that well then, he had the biggest heart ever, and that would have never happened. But boy, did he sell it as believable. We left, we took his car, we went on vacation, saw my uncle. Vacation was going to my uncle's house. My uncle was only 45, and he died 3 weeks later of a heart attack. So we got to see my uncle because of George Demas. I worked for George Demas. I went to the police academy while I worked for him. And then I got hired by Sheriff McKinney, who is there's no doubt, was the greatest probably adult in my life as far as shaping my career. I was, like most young deputies, I was a complete screw up. I messed everything up. We all think we're cool. You know, we think we look great in uniform. We think we know everything. And the truth is we don't know much at all. But Sheriff McKinney had this great knack of calling me in and telling me I was an idiot, and then spending the next 45 minutes with me explaining how to do it right. And I will tell you, I learned so much from him. So when people tell you that someone's a self-made man, I will say that I tried to work hard in my life, but I'm only here, you know, very simply because of him. So there's no law enforcement in my family. No one that I know of in my family or distant family had ever worked in law enforcement. So that's not how I got the interest. So people ask me all the time, how did you become interested in law enforcement? And I remember my mom telling me that it was probably from the age of 4 that I was running around pretending to be a policeman. And I was trying to figure out, well, where did that influence come from? And the only thing I can remember is that really ridiculously corny show Chips. Yeah, you remember Chips? Like they're riding on the motorcycles, and the motorcycle's not really moving because it's only half a motorcycle. But they looked so good in uniform. And what I liked about Chips is they always did the right thing. They were always ethical. They were always good. I mean, I look back down, the show's ridiculous. I remember one episode where Ponch and John were catching criminals by using hand gliders. I mean, that's just not something we're doing in law enforcement a lot. Getting off our motorcycle and then jumping on a hand glider off a cliff to do surveillance on criminals. But the truth is, when you don't come from a whole lot and you see something that inspires you, it makes you want to work. So, you know, you take that first spark, that first bit of energy that made me think about law enforcement. You know, I remember the first, you know, serious person I dated lived in a very nice house, and I remember thinking they must be millionaires. I remember going in the house and it smelled good, and their furniture was nice, and it wasn't all scratched up. And I just couldn't believe it. And now I go by the house and it's just a house. It's just a regular house. But back then I thought, boy, they must be millionaires. So the reason I bring all that up is because when you ask me what it's like to be sheriff, I think you have to understand the background. When you only live one place, like Tuscarawas County, and you have all these people that put you in this position to succeed, it really makes you love an area. So what's it like to be sheriff? Well, knowing that about my background, what it's like is, it's a great feeling that you're always around people that love you. That's one, even when they're mad at you. But two, there's an extreme sense of pressure when you're serious crime. So some of you don't know me. I know many people out there. Most of my career, about 24 years, was spent as an investigator. I was in uniform for a couple years, and then I was a detective, and I spent most of my years as an investigator until I got elected sheriff. I'm finishing up my second term next year, So all of my time other than that has pretty much been as an investigator. So over those years, I was the lead investigator that, I was involved in arresting 42 individuals for murder. So that's why this Kate Burkholder thing kind of interests me, because, that's she's got some good details in the stories. And I can remember specifically when it really hit me about how much I love this community. And most of you will remember the case was when we had 2 girls abducted from the Hollywood video store. There were 2 young girls abducted from the Hollywood video store down in Newtown Mall. And if you don't recall that case, it was really something. There was absolutely no idea who they were. These were great kids. One was murdered, the other one he tried to kill, and she ended up surviving after he tried to snap her neck, threw her off a bridge here in Dover, remember? And she survived, and she's still strong today, and we're still friends today. But I tell you this story because it really is what it's like to be sheriff in Tuscarawas County or be an investigator. I remember that while we were investigating that, everywhere I looked, I felt the pressure because we had 2 kids taken from this video store. 2 kids that weren't involved in anything bad, where you could say, well, they shouldn't have been involved with people like that. These were great kids, and it just didn't happen here. So as I went around investigating, and we have a team, obviously there's always a team of people doing different things. I remember we did a composite sketch using a computer program with Brandy, who's the survivor. She did a great job, and she tells us a story, and she tells us that she was at the video store, they rented these movies, and that the individual had just walked over from Farmore. Remember Farmore Pharmacy? And had walked over from Farmore, and he had a bag, a Farmore bag, and he asked for a ride. He convinced them that he needed a ride. They knew it wasn't right. They debated, but part of being from a small county is we're just really nice. Yeah. We hold doors for people. One of the big struggles we have with school security is trying to convince people, be rude, don't hold doors for people walking up into schools. Close the door, make them get buzzed through. That's part of security. But it goes against our nature. That's not what we're about here. So they knew that they shouldn't be giving him a ride. They talked about it. They whispered about it. And then they said yes. They get up the road. The individual pulls a gun on them, takes them out, murders one girl, and the story goes on. Now, what you may not know, if you never heard, is the gun wasn't even a real gun. Oh. It was a BB gun that looked exactly like a Glock pistol, still in our evidence room today, but they didn't know that. And they go on, and he throws her after he commits the first crime. They walk the railroad tracks for a couple miles, end up on a bridge here in Dover, and he tries to snap her neck like you do in the movies. Well, she was so small, her whole body flipped over. And he strangled her, left an impression of the necklace she was wearing, every little fake diamond that was on it. Everyone was in there. And he did well strangling her because when you strangle someone, there's something called petechial hemorrhage, little petechiae that explode, blood vessels exploding. And you could see that all throughout her cheeks and eyes. And she was much closer to the death than we knew, but she was fine. Now, when I'm interviewing her, she doesn't know her friend's dead. Because remember, she faked her death. He threw her off a bridge and then sat watching her float in the river, and she was alive the whole time pretending to be dead. Man. I mean, that takes a lot of guts, right? That takes a lot of nerve to do that, and a lot of calm and a lot of being brave when you're probably in the most terrified time of your life. So anyway, Brandy does this composite. She tells us we go to Farmore. We go walk the tracks. We find his Farmore bag. We know exactly what aisle he was in. We know what register he was at. We know exactly what time. And I knew that Farmore had video, right? Back then it was on VHS tapes, but they had video. And I go down to Farmore, a couple of us, we're excited. we get them all to call the manager in early, security gets us in, we go up, we know exactly what register. But back then it was VHS tapes. They forgot to push the tapes in. So we knew what he bought, we knew exactly when and where, but we didn't have any idea. So we bring in the cashier, the specific cashier, and I learned something very interesting about cashiers that day. I showed the cashier the receipt. She could not even begin to tell me what she looked like, but she could tell me what he bought, and she could tell me what the person before him bought and the person after him. Because she said, the whole time my head is down and I'm scanning items. She's paying attention to the items. She never pays any attention to the people at the register. And I remember leaving there just completely sick to my stomach. I also remember that you know, we worked 24 hours on that, you know, and I also remember that not eating, and I remember specifically not going to somewhere to get food because I didn't want to face anybody that would be wondering, like, you know, why in the hell are you here eating? Why aren't you catching, you know, who killed this person? So that's a big part of what it's like to be an investigator. I mean, the longest I've ever worked was a murder down outside of Pioli. I got called out on a Tuesday morning at 5 and worked around the clock, never went home, never took a nap, never did anything until Saturday night. We got him in custody. So that's probably the best way I can express what it's like to be a sheriff in a community where you feel like you truly can't let people down. You know, that's one of the best ways I can describe what it's like. Now, I've always often wondered what it's like in a big community where they have, you know, hundreds of investigators and hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And I would guess the benefit would be you would be a lot more anonymous. You know, and I watched, when I watched the first Kate Burkholder movie, which is nothing like the book, really. Well, it is a little bit. That was the one thing that I kind of identified with is everybody knew her. If you ever watched the movie, she was jogging through town and people, you know, stopped and looked at her because they knew about her past. And that's a lot here. I can tell you a lot of people know about the time when my house was condemned. I was in senior government class with Phil Tidrick. That was the class. And my house was on the cover of the paper 3 days in a row. Now, where did I tell you I lived? I lived right across from the high school. So I remember sitting in government, which, by the way, in government, we read the newspaper. That's what we did. And people were looking about the story of my house, and then would turn around and look out the window, and there was my house. So it was a pretty awkward time for me. All those things make you stronger. And I'll be honest with you, not one kid was ever rude to me about that at all. Not one kid ever made fun of me or bullied me, but it was very awkward being there. And I remember that the girl I dated at the time had kept those newspaper clippings. And I was so mad, and I remember taking them and throwing them away because I just wanted that part to be my past. You know, I didn't want that to be something that happened. So when I talk about, I gotta watch my time because I can talk forever. You know, when I talk about what it's like to be sheriff, I think you have to know all of those things. I think it could be different if a person from out of county moved here, lived here long enough to run for sheriff, but didn't have the relationship with everybody. And I think that they would have a completely different experience. Not better or worse, just different. So I can only talk about what it's like, you know, being Orvis, which is also a pretty memorable name, which I despised my whole life until I ran for sheriff. Then it was kind of cool because there was only one. But my uncle, who was also named Orvis, he didn't like it either. But he was also honored that I was named after him. So, you know, after that, there were lots of murders. I worked several dozen murders. There were others, though, that just, they constantly changed the community. You know, we had wonderful people, the Chumneys, taken from Strasburg, and that was another one that just wrecked the community. I mean, everywhere I went, that's didn't matter if it was, kids or adults, that's what they were talking about. And then a few years back, I think 2016 or 2017, we had a young boy abducted in Mineral City. And that's a very rare thing, to have a stranger abduction like that. On television, it's very common, but in this kind of an area, it's a very uncommon thing. I've got 30 years there, and at the sheriff's office, and if you remember that story, it was a young boy, 11 years old, walking home with a friend in Mineral City. They got to a point where this one lived that way and this one lived that way, so they split up, each of them a block from their home. And a wanderer from the Miami area who had been up here was hiding in the woods to get cool because it was a hot day, and just by chance ran out, snatched the little boy, put his hand over his mouth, and drug him back into the woods, and tried to kill him, tried to murder him, beat him very, very badly. The boy should not have lived. I'm very proud to say that not only did he live, he's got no physical repercussions to this day. Now he has a giant scar because his entire head was, caved in. So he wears his hair so it covers up that scar. But outside of that, he performed in school normally, and he has no physical defects, and it's a pretty amazing thing. But those kind of things, I remember when we were at the scene, it was you guys, it was the public that caught the killer. Or attempted killer in that case. What happened was, in that case, the boy was rushed up to Akron Children's Hospital for surgery. I went up there to see, is there anything we can get from him? We knew nothing. What we knew was a mother reported her son missing, and then sometime later he was spotted, head caved in, blood there, but he was moving. And we wanted to see, is there anything he could tell us? Now, he was in bad shape, so we weren't very optimistic. So I drove up to Akron Children's Hospital. Guys, our staff is very devoted. Guys were coming from home. You didn't have to order anybody out. They were just coming. Because we knew he was in the attacker was in the woods somewhere. There was a big wood line there. We had enough deputies to kind of secure the roads, but not necessarily to search the woods very thoroughly. So what we were doing was trying to keep him trapped. I get up to Akron Children's Hospital. I remember this young boy laying there, and the first image I remember was so much blood kept coming out. They were putting blood in him, and he was laying down, and then the eye sockets were completely full of blood pools. And I remember the nurse just kept scooping it out, but she couldn't keep up, he couldn't open his eyes. He could have opened his eyes, but there was just too much blood. So he was basically going through this blind at the time. And I couldn't talk to him. I mean, it's just like a scene from television. I mean, you're going to hear a lot about the murder rate in certain years going down. But I will tell you, that is mostly attributed to the medical profession. They are incredibly good at what they do. People that would have died decades ago are surviving, and this little boy was one of them. Well, anyway, I'm sitting there going, can I talk to him? And they're going, they're yelling at me. Of course you can't talk to him. And they're getting ready to move him down the hall, and I'm standing on my way. I brought my camera because I didn't know if I was going to get pictures. I couldn't get pictures then. And then all of a sudden, I hear them. They yell for me, and I step in about halfway in the room, and it's just total chaos. And he looks and he says, he doesn't look at me because he can't open his eyes, but he says, "Green pants." That's all he says. And I says, "Green pants." And I'm like a nervous wreck, and they start running down the hall with him, just like you see in the movie. They're literally sprinting his cart down the hall, and I'm jogging behind. And he says, he goes like this, he says, "The shirt was his." So when he was found, he had a shirt tied around him trying to strangle him. And he was trying to tell us it was the attacker's shirt. So we did know a general description of the male. We had the green pants. So I called from the hospital, and we called the dispatch center, and we asked them to put out what's called a reverse 911 call. And a reverse 911 call is we can pick up a map on our digital mapping. We can draw any kind of polygon around it. We can record a message, and then it'll send it out to every phone in that area. So we put out his description, and again, this is what it's like working in Tuscarawas County. I remember flying back from Akron, and I remember talking to the other deputies, and the neighbors just all came out of their houses. And nobody cared that there was a dangerous guy on the loose. They knew a little boy had been attacked, so people just started coming out on their porches and looking. And sooner or later, the assailant tried to flee. He came out of the woods, he tried to cross 800, and a lone woman called 911 and started following him. She'd pick up to a jog because he was trying to run, and then she'd walk, and then he'd turn and he'd saw her, and he'd come at her, and she'd back away, and then as soon as he'd continue on, she'd start following him. She stayed on the phone the whole time until the deputy that was closest got there and was able to take him in custody. So that's what it's like being a sheriff in Tuscarawas County. You know, everything we do down here is a little bit different. You know, every year, if you look at how much money we raise for the 4-H kids, how much money the United Way raises, I mean, we break a record every single year in just about all those categories, and it's really an honor to work here. But it's also very humbling, and it's a little scary when you know that something so critical like that little boy's case is in your hands. It makes you feel, it makes you feel like something that you owe the community. And people ask, like, when I've done those cases, was it hard to work that long or that many days? It really never was. It wasn't adrenaline. It was really probably the fact that I felt like I owed it to the community. Now, and Kate Burkholder works in the Amish, and of course, we have Amish here. Western and southern part of our county is completely kind of different orders of Amish. They do things differently and talk a little differently, and their buggies are a little different. But I went to the FBI Academy, and when I was in the FBI Academy, we had to give presentations. I was there for 12 weeks, and we had to give presentations, and we had to give presentations about the county we were from. And I remember trying to explain to them, Ganat and Hooten and the Amish all living happily together in this county. And there were some guys from other states and other countries. The guys with other countries would always bug me about the Amish at lunch, wanting to know what they were like. But I remember when I was giving a presentation before about 50 of the other cadets down there, that they asked me, one of them says, "Hey, so what do your Amish make in your county?" Because, depending on where they're from, the Amish make different things. And I said, in my county, they make money. Because they are so good at everything they do, and it sells like crazy. So they just make money. It doesn't matter what they touch. They make money. They make patio furniture, money. They build houses, it's money. So we have a. But I usually answer that question with, I think what our area is most famous for is heirloom furniture. Really, really top quality furniture that people want to pass down for generations. So it's a lot of fun. Being the sheriff, it's also very hard at times. It's very difficult times like this. Since COVID has been by far the most difficult. I have about 112 employees, and they are all incredible. Working in a jail as a corrections officer is a very special job. That individual that kidnapped that little boy and tried to kill him, he was in our jail for, about 9 months for his trial before he went to prison. And he got life without the possibility of parole. But he was very difficult. I mean, most of the time when you investigate a murderer, as an investigator, you try to picture a monster. It kind of motivates you a little bit. You're trying to picture this horrific person. Who is this horrific person that took Brandy and Liz and killed Liz? And then you meet him. And I knew the guy. I was his juvenile probation officer just a few years before. And he's bawling in front of me as he confesses. That was an incredible case, again, because his mother helped us catch him. And his mother loves him to this day. She still goes to visit him regularly. She'll never stop loving her son. But in that moment, she did the right thing and she helped us catch him. She had a feeling her son was responsible because he disappeared. And we put a trap on her phone, and he made a call from a pay phone in Coshocton, and that's how we picked him up. And then I drove to Coshocton and he confessed. But you always picture these monsters. And TV does a lot for that too, that there's these, horrible people that are banging axes above their head, sharpening them, chanting devilish chants. And those people do exist. But the only real person like that I've ever dealt with was the individual that kidnapped the little boy in Mineral City. It was, I'm not about calling people names, but he was not human. He was, at that point in his life, he was eating live animals. We know that for sure. We found evidence that he was in a barn and he ate a guy's cat. Well, just ate it, just killed it and ate it. And if I won't tell you the things he did to that poor young man, but I'm telling you, a human being couldn't do it. And then 9 months into jail, trying to attack staff, throwing feces at him, smearing feces all over his cell. He was truly, I don't know if you ever know this, but in my 30 years, he was the only individual, Judge O'Farrell, handled that case. Thankfully, he was a very experienced judge, and you don't want an issue to come up of appeal. But that case, Judge O'Farrell actually ruled that he couldn't attend his own trial. And we had to strap him in a chair, kind of like Hannibal Lecter. He watched his trial on TV, and we had to put a lawyer in a cell with him. And believe me, the lawyer didn't sit too close. And we had to put a corrections officer in there the whole time, even though he was strapped in. And then another lawyer representing him in the courtroom. So that was one of those rare cases where there was truly someone who had changed from, having any outlook of a person. There was no communicating with him. He spoke some words. Most of them didn't make a lot of sense. He did know, he could speak sentences, but then he would go into gibberish about conspiracies and things like that. But he knew he had done wrong, and one of the things that's important when you talk about someone's mental health, the criminal justice system will treat all kinds of mental health as best they can, which isn't very good. But when it comes to, getting out of the crime because you might be mentally ill, the criminal justice system really only cares about one thing. If you knew that what you did at the time was wrong. So when you hear about these guys who try to claim, insanity, but then you heard about them that right after the murder they hid evidence, I can almost guarantee you they're not going to be found criminally insane. Because the criminally insane don't know to go hide evidence. They don't think about that. That thought process almost guarantees they'll be found criminally sane, even if they're suffering from extreme mental illness. This individual, his name was Randy Vento, was extremely ill at that point, but he was criminally sane. He disposed of evidence, he hid, all the things that were necessary, and he got life without the possibility of parole. So, thankfully he will not be able to hurt anybody. But, those cases, those kind of things really affect you as a person. I remember leaving Akron Children's Hospital, and I was driving way too fast. I had my lights and sirens on, and I called my wife, and I was bawling. She says she couldn't understand a word I was saying. I was bawling because of what I just seen. And I wanted to get back to the scene now to help catch the guy, right? Which, by the way, the 911 thing worked. He was in custody before I got back. But I'm driving as fast as my little car will go, way too fast. I'm bawling. My wife can't make it out, and she doesn't know where I'm at. So she hears a siren. Never a cop around when you need one. She hears a siren, and she thinks I'm hurt in the back of an ambulance. And I can't make out anything. And that's only ever happened to me twice, that case and Brandy Hicks. Now, when Brandy Hicks did the composite for me, I held tight. We didn't tell her friend was dead yet because we wanted her to hold her composure to do a composite. And then later that day, I just cried like a, just cried and cried and cried because I could see that her strangulation took her close to death. Guys will tell you that they could shoot somebody with no problem. I don't have any idea if I have a problem or not. I'm pretty sure I can do it, but that might be the end of me afterwards. I don't know how that's going to affect me. I've got 30 years here. In the first 28 years, we didn't have a single shooting. In the last 2 years, we've had 3. My office has had 3. I promise you, if you knew all the intimate details, some of it's on video, some of it's not, but if you knew all the intimate details, you would be very proud about how my guys acted. But don't believe just because they were justified and it was right and you'd have done the same thing, don't believe that some of them don't struggle with that. We're just nice people. We don't want to shoot people. It's just, but you'll hear these young guys and they'll say, well, I could shoot somebody no problem. Well, you might be able to shoot them, but it's the after effect that you got to worry about. And I just had a meeting today with one of them involved in that shooting, and he's doing well, but he still struggles. And he struggles when he gets a call right close to where it happened. So I can't tell you what it's like to be Kate in the Amish community when she came from the Amish, but I can tell you that's what it's like being me here, because I walked in and and the first thing I saw was these 2 ladies, and they were laughing at me. Now, why were you laughing at me? Because they knew a story when I was riding with a buddy when we were young hooligans. And my hooligan friend lost control of the car and hit friends of theirs and relatives, and that's how they know me. So, I can't walk into this crowd and even pretend to be someone cool, because they're like, I knew you when you were crashing into Carrie McAfee on Old Town Valley Road. And that's what it's like being me and the sheriff of Tuscarawas. But I wouldn't have it any other way, because it keeps you humble. I actually have a couple co-workers here listening. And honestly, Ms. Castillo, we didn't know your work. But one of my co-workers sitting back here, she is a big reader, reads a lot. So I tell her that, I got asked to do this, and she says, oh, I remember that movie. I'm going to get the books. I think she's on book 6, 8 already. So it's not very long. She's on book 8. She's a real serious reader. I'm not sure she actually does any work. But she just told me this morning or yesterday, she says, I says, oh, I got that thing at the Reeves tomorrow. She goes, oh yeah, I'm going. And she didn't even know she said this. I says, oh, you're going to listen to me? She goes, the books are fantastic. And that was the nicest way ever. I go, no, I'm not going for you. I hear you all day long, and I'm not going for you. That's another thing. I'm one of the most disorganized people ever. And I could never stand up here and pretend to be cool when she's sitting there, because she's taking notes. So anyway, does anybody have any questions? I know that I was supposed to. Yes, sir.
You think public executions?
Executions.
What's that?
You think public executions?
Public executions.
I don't know. I can tell you that the laws involving execution are very complicated. Most people don't realize that not every murder in Ohio even qualifies for the death penalty. It has to fit one of 10 conditions. And some of them I hate. And I'm going to give you this. For example, if someone kills you, it's just a regular murder, they cannot be put to death. If they kill me, they can, because I'm a peace officer. I kind of have a problem with that. And even though I like the gesture, but we're all the same, right? If you kill more than one person, like the Chumneys, that case, or like when we had Thomas Dillon, the serial killer, who was, killed 5 people, or we had, we had a cross-country killer case that started here, just outside Newcomerstown, and there was murders in 4 states. Those all qualify for the death penalty. The problem is the appeals process is so complicated, and most families opt out of it. For example, in the Chumney case, that had been filed as a death penalty case. And I can assure you, we would have gotten the death penalty. The judge was pro-death penalty. The evidence was clear. We had all the confessions. The problem was the appeal process takes many years. In that appeal process, even if it's going your way, if a new federal judge is appointed and that federal judge rules that the death penalty can no longer stand, that case that was decided 10 years ago now can have to start all over. So in the Chumney case, for example, by them getting life, what we call LWOP, life without the possibility of parole, they can never be considered again. And that was more important to the family, to not have to worry about 10 years from now what a different thinking federal court might say. So it's a complicated process. I think it would some of these individuals, though, they just don't think. I mean, we have individuals like they would pass third strike laws in parts of the country, or even just getting arrested on a third felony give you life, and it didn't stop any of them. You would just think that risk is there. You come in, if you've never toured the jail, you really should sometime. You can call me, I can set that up. It's not what you think it is. And they don't have anything. I mean, there were rumors when this jail was built, it was 30 years old last year, there were rumors that there was a swimming pool in the jail. There's no swimming pool in the jail. There's no weights for them to lift. In fact, in Ohio, it's illegal to have a weight room in a jail facility. They passed an Ohio law making it illegal so that these prisoners don't just sit around all day getting big and buff to go out and hurt people. Now, they do get exercise, but it's very minimal as far as what they're able to do. And if it's cold out, they have to just do it in their cell area. If it's warm out, we have an outdoor rec area. And what I mean by outdoor is it's got 25-foot walls and a chain link fence over the roof. They never can see anything other than the sky. And they can play a little bit of basketball in flip-flops. That's it. But if you come there, you might expect to see, I don't know what you'll expect, but what you'll see is guys who are living their whole lives in an area this big, and they just pace. And they pace. And they stop and they look at you. They got these little windows in their door. It's really creepy at night. Because if you go in at night, you go in, they hear the big steel doors closing, and they all come up to those windows and just stare. And they'll do that all night long. So it's a bizarre, sad thing that they become accustomed to that way of life. And it's also very bizarre when a guy gets locked up and he gets transferred down to a housing area, and it's like old home week, and he's there with a bunch of friends. By far the number one thing that we have to battle is drug addiction. People ask all the time why we're still fighting the drug war. There is no other war, guys. This is it. If we eradicate drugs, which I know we'll never completely eradicate drugs, or maybe even marginally, but if we did, the jail would be empty. It would be empty. Our jail was built in '92 for 100 people, 88 males, 12 females. When it opened, we used to fill it with federal prisoners because the feds paid us a lot. That's how we paid off our jail quickly. Now we can't do that because we're always full, we're over full, we're 30% over capacity, like every jail. But back then we would only have 2 or 3 females, maybe a domestic violence, maybe a passing bad check, and now we'll have 40 in a jail that was built for 12. So, there's a big shortage in female space all throughout the state of Ohio. Every sheriff will tell you they're begging for places for females. That's what addiction has done. Heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl and all those kinds of things. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, my youngest son is a correctional officer out in Vegas. He's in the lesser. He got popped about 6 months ago. The guy popped him. He ended up they took him to the federal prison.
Yeah.
What happens in Tuscarawas County?
If you assault a corrections officer,
yeah.
So there's a difference between a jail and a prison. A jail is a place where Judge Tamakis, Judge Ernest, those judges, they can sentence somebody up to 18 months here for certain offenses. But generally what's in there is it's pretrial confinement. It's the people waiting for their trial before they go to prison. So we have both. But if you assault one of our COs and you are waiting for your trial, you're just going to be still in our jail. You're going to get locked down in a little room for about 60 days with nothing to see, a tiny little room, but you're going to stay in the same place. Now, that would also be charged as a new crime, which is a felony, to assault them, and then they would have to get an additional sentence to that. And it happens. We have COs get assaulted, but mostly it's the games that the inmates play. They're bored, they have too much time on their hand, they're always trying to sneak stuff, they're always trying to, break the rules. What's funny is the serious inmates, with the maximum security inmates, they cause the least amount of problems. They've become adjusted to jail life. That's all they ever going to expect, so they know I'm not going to have them take this right away or that right away, so they obey the rules the best. But yeah, so. Ma'am? Yeah, we do investigate cases where we know people, but generally, especially if it's the accused that's somehow connected, then it's really not very appropriate at all, because if you've got any kind of loyalty there. But it's tough in a community like this. I mean, listen, there's parts of this county where if you grew up there, you're going to be stopping your friends, high school buddies, and everybody, and you just got to try to do the right thing. So it happens. Usually, though, if you've built a good reputation, like if you treated people nice in high school, and you just treat people nice, I still have murderers write me letters, and I always answer them. I never lie to them. I don't wish them to get out. I don't say, hey, I'm rooting for you for parole. I don't do any of that stuff, but I just answer honestly. And they write me because I was honest to them when I got them to confess. When Matt Baca confessed, I said, Matt, I can't believe this. I've known you since you were 14. Why would you do this? And like I said, I was his juvenile probation officer. I try to treat him good. Doesn't mean I don't lose my cool. Doesn't mean that I don't make big mistakes. But it's quite a privilege to work here. So. Anybody else? You better stop, because the author's next.
I don't know how many of you have ever heard Orvis speak before, but I knew that this was going to be very informative, very interesting. Just educating us, informing us about what the job entails and how people deal with it, and the people that we have serving our community. And so I just really appreciate your coming, and I wanted to give you a little thank you. And I just wanted to say that I think it does help us understand what law enforcers are people, and they struggle with the same things we struggle with, and yet somehow or other they overcome. They are trained to deal with those emotions as best they can so that they can serve the public. So I, for one, really appreciate that. So thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, I have a question.
I want to tell you something that actually does. So from Facebook, you can read the book.
Yes.
And I want you to know that you're known all over the country because I shared it on Friends in Fiction. So you say beneath the tree at Central School, where I went to school. Now all over the country.
Yes.
I shared that.
Yeah, it's funny. That one did get a lot of views, and I had no misconceptions it was me, because I do a book every week, and most of them don't get over 50,000 views, so I figured it was a doggone tree, or Shel Silverstein, who was a mediocre kids author. But yeah, I read some, yes. I've gotten some national notoriety before for cases. Also, when I testified, I've got some stances on the way they're trying to legalize marijuana for medicine, and that got me notoriety. I had to block over 300 people on my personal Facebook page who had less than flattering things to say about me. But my wife thought some of those were humorous. So.
Yes, thanks again, because he's been to the library and every week on on his Facebook page, he's reading a book. So we appreciate that as well. Thank you.